Part 1. The Cry for Help. The galaxy was vast and filled with countless stars, but for the Velari Republic, the stars had gone dark with fear. Once, their people were proud explorers. They built shining cities across many worlds, their fleets roamed the skies, and their children grew up under peaceful suns. They believed they were safe, that progress and diplomacy would protect them forever. But safety is a fragile thing. It ended when the Krovax came. The Krovax were not like other enemies. They were not conquerors who demanded tribute, nor rulers who enslaved. They were predators, vast swarms that descended on planets with only one desire: to feed. Their ships were shaped like claws and teeth. Their soldiers were twisted things that tore flesh from bone. To the Krovax, the galaxy was nothing but a hunting ground. The first Velari world to fall was Calith Prime. Its cities burned within days. Families fled into space, but the Krovax followed. Entire fleets were torn apart like paper. The survivors who escaped told stories of skies turned red, of screams carried across comms, of children dragged into darkness. Soon, world after world followed. The Velari leaders met in their great hall, a place once filled with pride and calm debate. Now it echoed with panic. Holograms of destroyed colonies flickered around them, their voices cracked with fear. Every strategy they planned failed. Every fleet they sent was destroyed. At last, the Velari High Speaker stood. Her eyes were tired, her hands trembling. "We cannot stop them," she whispered. "If we fight alone, we will be erased." Silence followed. To admit weakness was painful, but truth was heavier than pride, so they made a decision. They would send a cry for aid, a desperate signal into the endless galaxy. It was not a message of pride, but of pleading. "Please," the transmission began, carried on every frequency they could reach. "If any who hear us still believe in mercy, help us. Our worlds burn, our children scream. We cannot survive alone." The message repeated over and over like a heartbeat of despair. They did not know if anyone would listen. Days passed, then weeks. The Krovax tightened their grip. Refugees filled every surviving colony. Tired parents carried children with hollow eyes. Soldiers stood guard with weapons shaking in their hands. Hunger spread, fear became normal. And still, the cry for help drifted into the void. The Velari had little hope. They knew most species would ignore them. In the Galactic community, aid rarely came without a cost. Allies were far away, and those close by had already turned their faces away. The Velari were doomed, and everyone seemed to know it. Yet somewhere across the darkness, the signal reached a world that most species spoke of only in whispers. A planet wrapped in storms and oceans, forests and deserts, where life was fierce and merciless. A world that had birthed a species stronger than most could imagine. Earth. Humans had not been part of the great alliances. They were new to the stars, still watched carefully by older civilizations. Stories about them spread in hushed tones, how they came from a death world where predators stalked every shadow, where survival was a daily fight, where war and struggle shaped their history. Some called them reckless. Others called them unstable. Many simply called them dangerous. And yet, when the human leaders received the Velari's transmission, they did not turn away. They listened. They saw the images of burned cities, of crying children, of a proud people breaking under the jaws of monsters. For a long time, they said nothing. The choice was heavy. Humanity had its own scars, its own wounds that never fully healed. To step into another war would mean blood, loss, sacrifice. But then came the simple truth. Humanity had always known pain, and because of that, they could not ignore the pain of others. Earth answered. The Velari did not believe it at first. When their listening stations caught the return signal, many thought it was a trick. The voice that came through was calm, steady, and filled with something strange, something the Velari had nearly forgotten. "We heard your call," the human envoy said. "We are coming. No promises of victory. No words of comfort. Just a statement sharp as steel." The Velari looked at one another in silence. Relief mixed with fear. They had asked for saviors. But the galaxy whispered warnings about humans. Stories painted them as warriors born from fire, as predators among the stars. Still, hope is a fragile thing, and even fragile hope is better than none. So the Velari waited, huddled under burning skies, not knowing what kind of help would arrive, not knowing if the answer to their desperate cry would bring salvation or something far more terrifying. The monsters of Earth. The Velari had always believed the Krovax were the greatest horror the galaxy could face. For years they had whispered the name of the swarm like a curse, trembling at the thought of claws tearing through steel, of jaws snapping through bone. The Krovax were terror itself. But now, watching the humans fight, the Velari began to doubt. The Terrans moved through the ruins like predators unleashed. They did not hide. They did not retreat. Their steps were heavy, purposeful, each soldier advancing with a brutal certainty. Their rifles spat fire that tore holes through Krovax flesh. Their blades struck with the weight of centuries of war. The Krovax screamed, charging in endless waves. But humans met them without fear. They fought in squads, but each squad fought like a beast with one mind. When the swarm pushed hard on the left flank, the Terrans shifted as one, holding the line. When a human fell, two more took their place, dragging the wounded back with one hand while firing with the other. The Velari, crouched behind broken walls, could only stare. To them, the battle was chaos, terror, and hopelessness. To the humans, it was simply survival, something they had known since their first steps on their deadly world. Velari Mother held her child close as she watched the humans tear through a group of Krovax that had once slaughtered her neighbors. She wanted to cheer, to cry out in relief, but the words stuck in her throat, replaced by a cold, shivering fear. For these were not gentle saviors. These were not knights in shining armor. They were something else. Monsters, whispered her mate beside her, his eyes wide with awe. The monsters of Earth. The words spread like smoke among the survivors. Some said them with fear. Some said them with gratitude. Most said them with both. The humans fought on, unyielding. They did not hesitate to unleash terrible weapons. Flames that devoured whole packs of Krovax. Explosives that shattered the ground itself. Thunderous shells that ripped the sky apart. Every shot, every strike was filled with fury, and yet within that fury there was precision. The humans never fired blindly toward the shelters. They shielded the weak even as they destroyed the enemy. A Velari soldier, young and shaking, dropped his weapon when a Krovax charged him. Before the predator's claws could strike, a human stepped in front, blade flashing, ending the beast in an instant. The human did not speak, did not even look back. He simply kept fighting. The young Velari picked up his rifle again, his hands still trembling, his heart pounding with shame and awe. The galaxy had warned them about humans. Other species spoke of their history, wars that scarred their own world, weapons that could burn entire cities, a will to fight that bordered on madness. The Velari had thought those stories exaggerated. Now, seeing it with their own eyes, they understood. Humans were not exaggerated. Humans were worse. But worse in a way that made survival possible. The battle stretched into the night. Fires lit the ruins, painting the sky orange and red. Smoke and ash carried the stench of blood. The Krovax howled in frustration, their swarms breaking against Terran steel again and again. The humans never stopped. They fought as if pain did not matter, as if death itself was only a shadow to be ignored. Even the wounded refused to lie still. A soldier with a shattered arm strapped his rifle to his other side and fought on. Another, limping and bleeding, rejoined the line rather than rest. To the Velari, this was madness. To the humans, it was simply what had to be done. Are they even alive beneath that armor? One elder asked, voice trembling. Yes, another replied softly. Alive. But not like us. When dawn finally came, the ruins were littered with Krovax corpses. The swarm that had seemed unstoppable was broken, scattered, fleeing into the sky. The ground was quiet again, but the silence was heavy, filled with the memory of thunder. The Velari emerged slowly from their shelters, their eyes wide as they looked at the humans standing among the ashes. Some Terrans were tending to their wounded, others reloading their weapons, preparing for the next wave. None looked triumphant. None looked relieved. Their faces, when their helmets lifted, were carved with exhaustion, scars, and grim determination. There were no smiles, no celebration, only silence. One small child, braver than the rest, approached. He looked up at a towering human, armor smeared with blood and ash. The boy's voice was small, almost lost in the wind. "Are you monsters?" he asked. The human looked down. For a moment, there was only the sound of crackling fires. Then slowly the soldier knelt. He removed his helmet, revealing a scarred, weary face. His eyes, though sharp, were not cruel. "No," the human said softly. His voice was heavy, tired, but steady. "We are people, just like you." The child blinked, confused. "But you fight like monsters." The human's gaze hardened. "When the galaxy hurts children," he said, his tone filled with iron, "they become monsters." The words sank deep into every heart that heard them. The Velari understood then. The humans were not demons nor angels. They were something far more dangerous, something far more necessary. And though fear still lived in their bones, so too did a spark of hope. Because for the first time they believed the Krovax could be defeated, for the monsters of Earth had come, and they were not leaving. Part 4. The Turning Tide. The night after the humans first landed was filled with fire. The ruins glowed red as smoke curled toward the stars. Velari huddled together in broken shelters, their wide eyes watching flashes of battle outside. They heard explosions that shook the earth, the endless roar of Terran weapons, and the guttural screams of the Krovax as they were cut down. For the first time in months, the Velari were not the ones screaming. The humans did not rest. Even when the Krovax broke and scattered, Terran soldiers pushed forward. Their armor was scarred, their faces weary, but they advanced with the same cold determination as if nothing in the universe could stop them. The Krovax tried again and again to crush them. Entire broods charged across the shattered streets. Winged horrors swooped down from the sky, their talons sharp as blades. Great beasts, armored like tanks, lumbered out of the shadows to smash the human line. But the Terrans never faltered. When the swarm came in numbers too great to count, the humans called down fire from the sky. Orbiting warships unleashed storms of light and thunder. Krovax nests were reduced to ash. Ships that had circled like predators were broken apart, their pieces falling like meteors. On the ground, humans fought in small squads, yet each squad carried the strength of an army. Their rifles barked fire, their blades flashed. Even when surrounded, they did not cry out for help. They simply fought harder. The Velari watched in awe. It was not beauty they saw, but terror wrapped in steel. The Krovax, who had once seemed unstoppable, now stumbled back. The swarm that had feasted on countless worlds was bleeding. And in that moment, hope, small, fragile, and uncertain, returned to the Velari hearts. Still, the fear did not leave. One Velari elder, his voice trembling, whispered to the others as they watched the humans carve a path through the predators. "They fight as if death itself is nothing. What kind of people live this way?" Another answered softly, "A people born on a world that kills them every day." The word sent a chill down every spine. The Terrans fought like no other species. They shouted to one another in harsh tones, their voices full of fire. They dragged the wounded to safety, then returned to the front without pause. They laughed even in the middle of slaughter, a sound that chilled the Velari more than the Krovax screams. It was the laugh of predators who had found prey, and yet woven into their brutality, there were glimpses of something different. A human knelt beside a dying Velari soldier, pressing a bandage against his wound until the bleeding slowed. Another offered food to hungry children, his scarred hand gentle as he passed them the precious rations. One squad formed a wall of steel around fleeing civilians, refusing to move even as the swarm battered against them like a storm. They were monsters. But monsters with hearts, the battle stretched for days. The Krovax poured their numbers into the fight, but the humans answered every charge with fire and steel. Slowly the swarm began to falter. The skies, once filled with enemy ships, grew thinner. The ground, once crawling with predators, grew quiet. The Velari dared to believe. When the Terran commander spoke to the Velari leaders, his voice was heavy but calm. "We will not stop," he said. "Not until the swarm is broken." His eyes were hard, carved by years of war, but there was no cruelty in them, only a promise. The Velari bowed their heads, gratitude mixed with fear, for these were not gods. They were not angels. They were simply humans, and humans were something far more dangerous. One night, as the stars burned above, a young Velari soldier stood watch beside a Terran marine. The alien's hands trembled around his rifle. He glanced at the human whose armor was scarred and blackened. "Do you never feel fear?" the Velari asked quietly. The marine turned his head, eyes tired but steady. "Of course we do," he replied. "But fear doesn't matter. What matters is what we do after." The words sank deep. The Velari soldier felt his heart steady. For the first time he understood. The humans were not fearless. They simply refused to surrender to fear, and so the tide turned. The Krovaks, for the first time in their history, fled before another species. Their swarms retreated into the dark, their ships burning as they ran. The predators who had feasted on countless worlds had found something stronger, something that hunted even them. The Valeri stood among the ruins of their world, their eyes lifted to the sky. Smoke and fire still rose, but hope burned brighter. The humans had changed everything. The cry for aid had brought monsters, and those monsters had turned the tide of the war. Part 5. The Fear and the Truth. When the smoke of battle finally began to clear, silence fell across the ruined city. The Krovak swarms had retreated, leaving behind only their dead and the broken shells of their ships. For the first time in months, the sky was empty of predators, but the silence was not peaceful. The Valeri crept out of their shelters, stepping carefully over the ashes. Their wide eyes turned toward the humans who now stood among the ruins. The Terrans were cleaning their weapons, repairing their armor, tending to their wounded. Their movements were steady, practiced, and calm, as though this slaughter had been nothing more than routine. There were no songs of victory. No cheers, no celebrations. The humans did not look like heroes. They looked like storms waiting to break again. The Valeri whispered among themselves. Gratitude warred with fear in their hearts. The Krovaks were gone, but what remained in their place seemed just as frightening. A mother clutched her child tighter when a human walked past. His armor blackened and cracked, his face scarred beneath a lifted helmet. She wanted to thank him, to cry in relief, but the words died in her throat. His eyes were hard, his expression grim. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a monster carved from war itself. The whispers grew louder. They fight like demons. They have no fear of death. Are these truly our protectors? Even among the Valeri soldiers, unease spread. They had seen humans laugh in battle, laugh while killing, as though blood and fire were familiar friends. They had seen them refuse to rest even when bleeding. They had seen wounds that would break any Valeri ignored as if they were nothing. It was as if pain itself could not touch them. One elder, voice shaking, said what many were thinking. The Krovaks are monsters, but perhaps the humans are worse. Yet despite their fear, the Valeri could not turn away. They watched as a squad of humans shared their rations with hungry families. They saw a medic kneel for hours beside wounded aliens, refusing to move until the last life was saved. They saw a soldier, towering and scarred, pause to lift a crying child into his arms, rocking the little one gently before setting him back with his parents. It was confusing, almost impossible to understand. How could the same beings who killed without mercy also show such care? That question burned in every Valeri heart until, finally, one small voice spoke it aloud. A boy no older than 8 seasons stepped forward, his thin legs trembling as he walked. His parents gasped, reaching for him, but he did not stop. He moved across the ruins until he stood before a towering human soldier, a giant clad in heavy armor streaked with blood and ash. The boy's voice shook as he asked, "Are you monsters?" The battlefield seemed to hold its breath. The human paused. Slowly he knelt down, bringing his massive frame closer to the child. He removed his helmet with a hiss of air. His face was lined with scars, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes were weary, but there was no cruelty in them. He looked at the boy for a long moment before answering. "No," the human said softly, his voice deep and tired. "We are people, just like you." The boy frowned, his small brow creasing. "But you fight like monsters." The human's gaze hardened, not with anger, but with something deeper. He placed a scarred hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "When the galaxy hurts children," he said, his voice carrying to every Valeri who listened, "we become monsters." The words struck like thunder. The Valeri who had been whispering fell silent. Parents held their children tighter. Soldiers lowered their weapons, shame and awe mixing in their eyes. For in that simple answer they understood the truth. The humans did not fight because they loved war. They did not kill because they craved blood. They became monsters because someone had to. Because if they did not, the galaxy's real monsters, the Krovaks, would win. The human rose again, placing his helmet back over his head. He turned away and rejoined his squad, his steps heavy but steady. The boy ran back to his parents, who embraced him with trembling arms. Around them, the Valeri murmured softly, Not with fear this time, but with something new. Respect. It was not the kind of respect born of admiration. It was the kind born of understanding. The Velari no longer saw the humans as demons. They saw them as people who arid their pain like armor, who wore their scars as shields, who chose to become terrifying so others could survive. That night, the Velari did not whisper in fear. They whispered in hope. For they knew that as long as the monsters of Earth stood with them, the Krovaks could be beaten. Part 6. The Legacy of Monsters. When the last battle was over, silence returned. The fields where the Krovaks had stood were now filled with smoke, ash, and broken bodies. The swarm that had once seemed eternal was scattered and fleeing. Their ships, once thick across the skies, burned in orbit like falling stars. For the first time in months, the Velari could lift their heads without hearing the scream of predators in the air. The humans had won. But the victory was not celebrated with cheers. The Velari expected drums, songs, or at least the proud sound of triumph. Instead, the humans were quiet. They moved among the ruins with steady steps, tending to their wounded, gathering the fallen, repairing what they could. There was no laughter, no shouts of joy. It was as if they had not won a war but only survived another storm. The Velari watched in silence. Some still trembled at the sight of Terran armor, scorched and blood-stained. Others whispered prayers of gratitude. All of them knew that their lives had been spared only because these strange monsters from Earth had chosen to stand in their defense. But even with safety restored, questions filled their hearts. Were these humans truly their saviors? Or were they only another danger waiting to strike one day? One young Velari soldier, his weapon still shaking in his hands, approached a Terran officer. The human stood tall, helmet off, his face lined with exhaustion and scars. "Why?" the soldier asked softly. His voice cracked. "Why would you fight for us? We are nothing to you. Why come to our aid?" The human looked at him for a long moment. His eyes were dark and heavy, carrying memories the Velari could not understand. Then he spoke in a voice quiet but firm, because no one else would. The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. The Velari soldier lowered his gaze, ashamed. His people had begged, had pleaded, and most of the galaxy had turned away. Only Earth had answered, and Earth had answered not with mercy alone, but with fury. Days passed. The humans stayed only long enough to rebuild what was broken. They repaired water lines, cleared rubble, and trained the remaining Velari soldiers. They gave supplies freely, food, medicine, tools, then prepared their ships to leave. The Velari begged them to remain. Children clung to their armored legs. Elders asked for protection, but the humans only shook their heads. "We are not rulers," one commander explained. "We are not conquerors. We came because you called. Now you must stand on your own." The Velari struggled to accept it. They had grown used to watching the Terrans fight, to hiding behind their shadow. The thought of standing alone again filled them with dread. But deep down, they understood. Humans had not come to rule them. Humans had not come to claim their worlds. Humans had come to remind them what survival looked like. On the day of departure, the Velari gathered in the ruins of their capital. The Terran ships waited above, engines glowing. The people stood in silence as the soldiers of Earth prepared to leave. A child broke the stillness. The same child who once asked if they were monsters. He stepped forward, voice clear though small. "Will you come back if we need you?" he asked. The human soldier who had answered him before knelt once more, resting a heavy gauntlet on the ground. His face was weary, but his eyes softened. "If you cry out again," he said slowly, "we will hear. And we will come." The child nodded, though tears filled his eyes. He did not know whether to feel comfort or fear. As the Terran ships rose into the sky, their thunder shaking the earth one last time, the Velari watched with hearts heavy and hopeful. They would tell their children and their children's children of what they had seen. They would speak not of angels, not of gentle saviors, but of monsters who carried compassion behind their steel. The galaxy, too, would remember. Stories would spread across the stars of the Velari Republic saved by Deathworlders, of the day when humanity answered a cry for help. And every time the tale was told, it ended with the same truth. When despair fills the stars, when no one else will answer, the monsters of Earth will rise. Not because they are without fear, not because they are without scars, but because they have always known pain and will never ignore the pain of others. The Velari Republic lived on, and in the silence of space, all who listened learned a lesson they would never forget. The monsters of Earth were real, and they were watching. Part 2. The Arrival. The Velari survivors huddled in their shelters as the sky above their ruined world shook with thunder. Fires burned in the distance, sending black smoke into the clouds. The Krovac swarms circled like vultures, their shadowy ships hanging in orbit, waiting for the final strike. Every day, the Velari expected death to fall upon them. Then one dawn, the heavens tore open. It began as a sound, deep, rolling, unnatural, a vibration that shook the ground beneath their feet. Children covered their ears. Soldiers clutched their weapons in confusion. The noise grew louder, rising like the growl of some great beast. And then the sky itself split apart with light. Ships descended, black and silver, sharp-edged like blades. Their engines burned with fury, carving scars across the clouds. These were not the smooth, elegant cruisers of the Galactic alliances. These were predators of metal, built for war. Upon their hulls was painted a symbol that few Velari recognized but all would remember, a blue and white sphere. Earth. Humanity. At first, the Velari did not cheer. They did not even move. They only stared in silence, their eyes wide with a mix of hope and terror. They had asked for help, but what had come looked like a storm of steel. The Krovac swarms reacted at once. Alarm calls screeched through their channels. Predatory ships swooped down to attack the newcomers. Black claws of metal collided with the Terran fleet. The sky filled with fire. And then the humans struck back. The first volley of Terran weapons roared across the heavens. Entire Krovac formations vanished in blinding bursts. Beams of light cut through the swarm like scythes through grass. The Velari who watched from the ground saw their enemies, creatures who had seemed unstoppable, burst apart like insects against glass. But the true terror came when the humans landed. From the dropships thundered figures clad in armor, towering and unstoppable. Their exosuits hissed and growled with every step, heavy boots sinking into the ash. They carried weapons larger than a Velari's body, machines that spat fire and thunder. Where they walked, the ground shook. The Velari had asked for soldiers. What arrived felt more like monsters. The first clash came swiftly. A swarm of Krovac warriors, beasts with claws that could shred steel, charged across the ruins toward the human landing zone. The Velari braced themselves to witness another massacre. For so long they had watched the Krovac slaughter without resistance. They expected the same, but the humans did not retreat. They did not even flinch. The moment the Krovacs appeared, the Terran line moved as one. Rifles roared. Explosions thundered. The predators fell in waves, torn apart before they could even reach the humans. A few broke through, leaping with jaws wide. The Terrans met them with blades attached to their rifles, tearing through flesh as if it were nothing. The Velari could only watch in disbelief. For them, the Krovacs were nightmares. To the humans, they were prey. Hours passed, but the humans never stopped. Their armor bled sparks. Their weapons steamed with heat, but still they fought without pause. They shouted to one another in voices harsh and fierce, a language that rolled like thunder. When one fell, others dragged them back, covering the line without hesitation. The Krovacs, creatures that had devoured whole civilizations, broke against them like waves against stone, and the Velari began to realize something that filled them with both awe and dread. The humans did not fight like protectors. They fought like executioners. Every strike was meant to kill. Every movement carried fury, as though the very existence of the Krovax was an insult they could not allow. One Velari elder, watching from the safety of a half-collapsed shelter, whispered in trembling voice, "Are these our saviors, or demons born from another death world?" No one answered, for though fear churned in their hearts, hope had sparked as well. Because for the first time in months, the Krovax were fleeing. In orbit, Terran warships pushed deeper into the swarm, breaking their fleets apart. On the ground, humans advanced step by step, every blast carving a path forward. The sky burned with their wrath. And yet, despite their monstrous appearance, there were moments, small, brief, that showed something different. A Terran soldier paused in battle to lift a Velari child who had been trapped under rubble, placing her gently in her mother's arms before turning back to the fight. Another broke open his own water supply to give to a thirsty elder. A squad surrounded a group of Velari refugees, shielding them with their armored bodies while fire rained down from above. Behind the steel, behind the fury, there was still something human. The Velari did not know what to feel, terror at their saviors or gratitude for their survival. But one thing was certain. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cry for help had been answered, but the galaxy's whispers were right. Earth had not sent angels. It had sent monsters.